I've had several, and I mean more than one, but less than 50 experiences. As a child, I was going to Catholic church, if that means anything. But with that in mind, I was raised thinking there were spirits, but not having seen or heard anything. Shortly after my grandpa died, I was staying at my grandma's house. I was in maybe the fifth grade when this happened. This was my first experience, and I never told anyone about it because I was a kid and nobody would believe me. That night, I stayed at my grandma's house. I slept on the couch. I was too scared to sleep in her room. That's where my grandpa died. He died in his sleep. As a child, that would freak anyone out. But my grandma had this clock that would chime every hour. I remember being woken up to the chime. It felt like it wouldn't stop. I remember opening my eyes because I thought I heard my grandma walking down the hall to get water or something. Expecting to see my grandma, I was going to ask her when the chiming would end. But when I looked down the hall, I didn't see her. What I saw was, I can't describe it any better, a blue floating orb, and a massive one at that. It had to be the size of a head. It absolutely freaked me out, so I did what any child would do. Put my head under the blanket and closed my eyes so tight. I never brought it up to anyone, and that was definitely the last night at my grandma's house. Not long after that, maybe a month or so, at my old house. We've moved from that house about 7 years ago, and I have several experiences from there as well. I was in our basement with my younger sister. We were dancing to music with our childhood friend. I remember the song that I was dancing to when I saw this. It was Funhouse by Pink. It was the middle of the day during the summer, if that accounts for anything. But I remember I spun around and saw this extremely tall white figure that was standing in front of what was my room. I stopped dead in my tracks and just looked at it. It looked like lightning, electricity even. My sister and our friend noticed I wasn't dancing anymore and asked if I was okay. I said, "Don't you see it?" They of course said no. I didn't know what else to do, so I just sat on the floor and prayed for it to go away. And it did. I never saw that apparition again. I also remember one night I was reading on my Nintendo DS, lol, under the covers because it got cold in my room. And as I was finishing a chapter of some book I was reading on the internet, I felt a dip at my feet. Not thinking of anything since we've always had cats and dogs. Thinking it was one of our pets, I stuck my head out to pet them. And nothing was there, but the pressure of the dip was still at my feet. I once again pulled the blanket back over my head and prayed. The pressure didn't leave until after I finished my prayer. Thinking back, I believe it could have been my grandpa or one of my cousins who passed. But those are just my first few experiences. My experiences got creepier and creepier as I got older. Been thinking about some interesting experiences I had as a child with what I can only describe as shadow people. I have vivid memories of these tall, thin creatures with their vague features making their way into my bedroom late at night. Just before I fell asleep, looming over my bed, I'd keep my eyes sealed, still able to sense them. Could feel their eyes staring at me, their breath on my face as they got closer. Every time one of these shadow people made their way into my room, I had what I described as a faraway dream. Even though I wasn't asleep, my 7-year-old self couldn't think of a better description. Anyway, during these dreams, I would watch as the room seemed to stretch, making things seem as if they were far away. I'd hear what seemed like hundreds of voices, first as whispers, but growing in volume and apparent agony until I couldn't hear anything else. As the otherworldly cacophony reached its peak, one of the shadow people would come into my room, walking in through the open door sometimes, but more often through either the closed attic trapdoor or straight through the second floor window. My eyes would stay sealed shut until I could no longer feel the being's presence or I fell asleep. I would tell my foster parents, later adoptive, what happened, but was just assured that it was just a simple nightmare. I just kept experiencing them for about another 3 years, with less and less frequency. I only ever saw the shadow people at this house, and my first encounter was within a few days of being moved here. But I'd had faraway dreams for about a year before this. I visited the house while I was in my first foster house, because 2 of my siblings were being fostered here separately from me, and we'd ride with my parents to pick them up during visitation days. Here's some backstory. My great-grandmother was a devil worshipper, abused all of her children for the sake of what she was doing. She was evil, to say the least. She murdered her lover because he said he was leaving her and then killed herself in front of her children. Again, she was evil. Please stay with me as this story gets crazy. I'm adopted. I, now 22 male, was adopted at 18 months old. I had severe night terrors growing up because I would have terrible nightmares. I was always afraid of the dark because I felt like something was in it, ready to snatch me up. Night terrors would turn into sleepwalking. Sleepwalking turned into sleep paralysis as I got older, and because of that, I now have bad insomnia. I have panic attacks that keep me up all night because I dread going to sleep. When I was about 16 years old, I had a series of dreams for about a week. I've always been on the fence on whether there's a God or not, but in these dreams, I would see angels. They were beautiful, and they would speak to me and tell me everything would be all right. Then, at the end of every dream, I would feel a dark force enter my mind. I would wake up, but I wouldn't be able to move or say anything. I felt hands pinning me down. I could only move my eyes. Each night, that same thing would happen, lasting about a week. Every night that week, I would see a dark figure rise from the ground at my feet. It would just stare at me until the final night. The final night, it swiftly came next to my bedside. Its eyes pierced my soul. It stooped to my level, laughing, and said to me, "You will never become anything," laughed again, and left. As soon as it left, the forces holding me down released me, and I could move. Needless to say, that's when I stopped sleeping at night. Fast forward to 18. I decided to go to bed one night because the next day I had to catch a bus to Oklahoma. I live on the East Coast. For some insight, I'm a very lucid dreamer, and because of this, I know when I'm about to have a paranormal experience. I was asleep, and around 3 a.m., I started to feel something happening. It's like being submerged in warm water. My body kind of goes numb, and I hear a ringing noise. In my dream, I find myself walking down a hallway. At the end of this hallway, there was a cracked door. I open the door to see a room with no ceiling. The sky is a greyish-orange colour, and in the middle of the room, there's a chair. I look around, and no one is there with me. The door behind me has disappeared. I sit in the chair. As soon as I do, I'm surrounded by people. People I've never seen. They don't seem to have the intention of hurting me, but they're just staring at me. After a few seconds, they all in unison say, "Disorganize." As soon as they say that word, their faces start to literally melt off their bodies. Blood and flesh fall to the floor, and they all drop dead. I immediately wake up and see that same dark figure standing at the edge of my bed, laughing. I'm laying there crying. I try with all my might to yell out the word God. In the Bible, demons shudder at the very name. The figure at the end of my bed screams in agony and yells, "God is not here." then yells, and then finally leaves. I'm released, and I just sat there crying until the sun came up and I had to leave. My trip was to meet my biological mother after 18 years. Fast forward to me asking questions and her answering. That's when she tells me about my grandfather and great-grandmother. My grandfather had followed in his mom's footsteps for a time, but now has turned to God. Yet he will still call my mom late at night and says, "Baby, are you ready to learn about the powers you have?" To this day, my mom says no. When my grandfather is in a demonic mood, he gets these blues rings around the pupil of his eyes. It's trippy to say the least. About a year ago, I told my mom about all these experiences, and she basically said that it's all my great-grandmother's fault, because my grandfather admitted that his mom, before she took her life, cursed our bloodline and said we will never find happiness. Which explains why I always feel like I'm being followed and watched, why I have these dreams. But not all of us are given this gift. My grandfather has the gift of communicating with the unseen world. My mom does, as I do, and my younger sister does. It sucks because my grandfather, when asked about this, will deny it. Well, here we are today. I'm married with a 6-month-old. My wife and I are being tormented by this unseen thing. Just last night, I heard banging on the walls in my son's room. I checked the cam. Nothing. I lay back down. I hear some growling next to me. Nothing is there. I catch it peeking at me from out of around the corner. I see its movements in reflections, its whispers. My poor son, I'm sure he sees it, because he'll start screaming randomly at night. My wife is scared shitless too. I feel its presence. I never sleep at night, and during the day when I do sleep, I still feel like it's watching me, like a predator stalks its prey. I want this cycle to end. I'm tired of feeling threatened. I saw it. I finally saw it. Or at least what I believe it is. I live in my mom's 3rd-story attic. Yes, I'm well aware that I, a married man with a child, shouldn't be living with his mom. But we once lived on our own and we had to move back in because I lost my job due to the pandemic. This is my childhood home, so I've always seen and heard things. Most of the time, menacing whisperings. Well, just the other morning before sunrise, I saw what I believed to be the demon bothering us. My bedroom layout is simple. You walk up the steps to the top, and to the left is a bathroom door, down a 6-foot hallway, and to the right is the bedroom. No walls divide the bathroom from the bedroom, other than a door, of course. It's an open layout. When you turn right to go into the bedroom, on the far wall is the bed. And on the wall that is shared with the hallway leading to the bathroom is one of those big bookshelves with a large stereo system sitting in it. I apologize, it's a weird setup and hard to explain. I grew up in this house and know every creak and squeak that the floor makes. Right by the stairs, it squeaks when you step on it, so I'll wake up when I hear that because that means someone has reached the top of my steps. Well, this will happen multiple times a night, and every time it happens, I wake up. But the other night I saw something, someone, and it made me stop and stare in horror. A few nights ago, I was having a really hard time sleeping, and about 4:30, I woke up to the floorboards squeaking. I woke up, saw nothing, went back to sleep. Around 5 a.m, I heard it again. This time I sat up and looked around. But this time, something caught my eye. When I sat up, I saw this big cloaked figure walking past the door to the bathroom in the reflection of that large stereo on the other side of the bedroom. It's dark on my side, but we keep the bathroom light on because, quite frankly, we're afraid of the dark, and this created a perfect reflection in the stereo. I stared in horror, hoping, praying that I was just tired, or that it's just the ceiling fan or something other than what I knew it to be. I immediately woke my wife up and told her what I saw. She took my son and stayed the last few hours in the spare room on the second floor. I will never forget what I saw. It wasn't a flash. It was someone walking average speed across the light. I rescued a black cat, a Maine Coon Bombay mix, about 2 years ago. I named him Gomez, after Gomez Adams, of course, because he's super affectionate and very needy, as he was abused prior to me adopting him. Recently, he's been acting a bit odd. More than usual, I should say. Prior to this experience, he was occasionally seemed like he was chasing or playing with something else, but obviously, I saw nothing. He is a cat though, so they do weird things like having the zoomies at random times. But I have also occasionally felt a cat rubbing against my leg, and when I look down, Gomez is nowhere in sight. But I hadn't thought much of it due to mental health issues along with psychiatric medications. Moving forward, all these experiences seem to lead to another possible option. Gomez came with a paranormal buddy. So, a few nights ago, around 5 or 6 a.m., Gomez kept desperately trying to wake me up and would not leave me alone. I thought nothing of it, as he occasionally does this if he doesn't sleep well and requires extra cuddles at night. Then he finally left me alone after like 30 to 45 minutes. So whatever, no big deal. I went back to sleep. His food dispensed from his little robot feeder and he jumped down to eat. Not too long after, I felt paws crawl on my hip and lie down. This is where he normally sleeps. So again, no big deal. Well, I then heard Gomez crunching on his food, so I got confused and slightly woke up. I swear I saw another cat laying on me. It looked white with spots, so definitely not Gomez. Then Gomez jumped up, the weight lifted off my hip, and then he lay down on me. So long story short, I'm not sure if I was hallucinating. Night terrors, sleep paralysis, and bipolar. Still dreaming while half awake, or I have a ghost cat in my house. Gomez has been running around a lot more than normal and staring off in my room, occasionally seeming like he's following something with his gaze. With all of that being said, if I adopted Gomez and he came with a little ghost companion, I got 2 cats for the price of 1. And 1 only eats and requires vet insurance. So I'm going to mark it as a win. When I was a child, I was pretty sure my home was haunted, especially my bedroom, but I didn't want to scare anyone, so I didn't say anything. I moved out years ago, but recently my brother told me out of the blue that my childhood bedroom is definitely haunted. I asked him how he knew, and he said it just was. When I was 6 or 7, I saw a disembodied dead hand coming out of my closet. It freaked me out, but I brushed it off by telling myself that kids see things that aren't there sometimes, and decided to ignore it and not say anything. There would also be days when an abnormal amount of flies would suddenly appear in my room overnight. They'd stay in my room and disappear fairly quickly the same day. I also had a period in elementary school where I had terrible insomnia in that room. I wasn't scared, I just couldn't sleep. My parents finally decided to have me sleep in the guest bedroom and I was fine. Eventually I moved back into my bedroom and didn't have that problem anymore. I always avoided being alone in the house, especially at night, and thought I was just scared of being alone, but found out after I moved out that that wasn't the case. It's just the house that scares me. Anytime I was alone, I felt watched or like someone was directly behind me. On one of the few nights I agreed to house sit and didn't have anyone stay with me, I heard loud footsteps in the attic. My dad was constantly in the crawl space and attic doing home repairs, so I've ruled out some stranger secretly living in our home. There was also another time a few years ago that my brother and I were visiting and my dog started growling at the corner again. All of our animals interacted strangely and often with this corner. I jokingly said something about it being haunted, but immediately followed it up with, "Just kidding, it's not real." And the exact moment I said that, a heavy painting in the corner was picked up and thrown hard against the ground. The nail in the wall was fine. The wire it hung from was fine. The wall was fine and hadn't moved in any way. I quickly apologized and prompted to never taunt it again. I've lived in several haunted and non-haunted homes now, and all of the haunted ones have a very heavy, not in a bad way, just neutral energy, just like my childhood home. Anybody else experience anything like that? Thoughts? I don't know what I expect to get from this, but I do want to share my experience this past week. Last week, I failed to gain any restful sleep. On Monday, I arrived home late in the evening and ate a large meal within an hour or two of falling asleep. That night, I had nightmares revolving around demonic/spiritual activity, and eventually was startled awake around the witching hour. Tuesday night, the same thing happens, but not the same dream. I think nothing of it, as nightmares for me occur very seldom, but when they do, they typically revolve around demonic or spiritual activity, or my teeth falling out. So nothing out of the norm for me. Wednesday night, I'm able to eat dinner a few hours earlier before bed, but I still experience another nightmare. This time when I wake up, I continue laying in bed and calm myself back down. Just as I'm about to fall back asleep, I feel the pressure change in my bed. I remember the moment vividly because it scared the piss out of me, to say the least. I was sleeping on my side, and as I was about to fall back asleep, I felt the mattress move up and cup my back. As a mattress normally would if you were laying on your side. The movement of the mattress was as if someone or something was laying next to me and got off the mattress. I sleep alone on a queen mattress with a weighted blanket. I also don't have any pets. The only pressure significant enough to change the shape of the mattress would be me. Unaware of whether the dreams or the presence in my bed were influenced by my good or bad energy, I saged my place the following morning. It's now Saturday, and the dreams have ceased for the time being, and I haven't encountered that presence again. Throughout my life, I have always moved homes, schools, and suburbs, which has never been a problem. However, one particular house my mother and I moved into, I would regularly encounter a girl covered in blood. To elaborate, I'm now 18 and would have been 5 or 6 at the time we moved into the property. One afternoon, my mother and I were sitting in the lounge room watching kids' cartoons and eating popcorn. I had been seated for a while and really needed to go to the bathroom. As I walked from the lounge room to the bathroom, I noticed the linen cupboard had been left open, but only slightly. On approach to the cupboard, I remember feeling quite nervous, but confident to find out what was inside of the cupboard. To my surprise, there was nothing in the cupboard, but there was a space big enough from the floor to the next shelf, allowing me to fit quite comfortably in the cupboard. Being 5 and having the worst attention span, I decided to play with my truck in the linen cupboard. I'd been sitting in there and playing for what felt like forever with my truck, until a very petite, miserable-looking girl appeared across from me in the cupboard. I was ultimately quite confused and didn't know who the girl was, but had a sense of comfort and security when she was with me. After sitting and just staring at this girl, I quickly came to realize she was covered in blood from head to toe. We both looked up, and she began to cry and slowly tell me details about her father did some horrible things to her, which I prefer not to share, and ultimately ended up murdering her in the house. I would regularly try and clean her blood with tissues, towels, and other absorbent materials, but never had any luck. The interaction didn't last too long as my mother called me back to the lounge room. But after meeting her once, we spent numerous occasions in that cupboard comforting one another, and we became quite close friends. However, I am now wondering whether the spirit genuinely did want my help, or was trying to take advantage of me due to my age at the time. In the late fall of 2019, my mom decided to leave our narcissistic and emotionally abusive stepfather. She, my younger brother, and I packed our stuff up into a U-Haul and took it all to the new apartment we'd be living in. It was like a breath of fresh air getting out of that house and into a place away from that man. For the first couple months, everything was going normally. My mom would go to work, my brother would go to school, and I went to an alternative school that only required me to go 2 days a week. This meant that I got a lot of time home alone, something I'd eventually come to hate. It started off small. One day, I heard the front door open. It was about the time my mom and or brother got home, so I went downstairs to see who it was. The door was wide open and nobody was home. I checked the parking lot and my mom's car wasn't there. My brother was nowhere to be found either. I closed the door and went back upstairs after making sure nothing was missing. The most common occurrence when I was home alone were the footsteps. If I was upstairs, I'd hear someone walking around downstairs. If I was downstairs, I'd hear someone walking around upstairs in my room. It was almost a daily thing, so eventually I just stopped trying to investigate. Only once did the footsteps come into the same room as me. My bed was against a wall, and I was laying down facing that wall, just scrolling on my phone. It was around 10 to 4 in the afternoon, and I heard footsteps on the stairs. It was about the time my brother got home every day from school, so I thought nothing of it. The steps came into our room. We had to share one, and stopped right next to my bed. I rolled over to see what he wanted, but there was no one there. A few minutes after that, I heard my brother open and close the front door and start up the stairs. It couldn't have been him the first time. The worst it got was on this one night. Everyone in the house was sleeping, except for me. As I was laying in bed, my eyes were drawn to the far corner of my room, right next to my bedroom door. I don't really know a good way to describe it, other than saying it was too dark in that corner. Like there was just a black hole in the room. Every time I looked into that corner, I nearly had a panic attack. But I managed to pull my eyes away several times, only for them to be drawn back to the same spot. There were voices too. They were all whispering indistinctly, but they sounded angry and hateful. It was the most terrifying night of my life. I think the worst part is that nobody believed me. I got the classic response that it was just the house setting, or that it was just the pipes. I guess it doesn't matter anyways. Shortly after, my mom, brother and I left and moved into another house. Not for ghost-related reasons, lol. I haven't had another experience since. It all started summer of 2017. Me and my friend had moved into a 3-bedroom apartment. Everything seemed fine for the first month, until I started seeing shadows flicker out of the corner of my eye. It didn't bother me at first, until the night terrors started. This shadow thing would just be standing over me, tormenting me, morphing and twisting its body into horrific formations. After this, it escalated. It started showing itself in full body apparition to me and my friend. It would stand over my friend's bed till he couldn't stand it anymore. And my friend would come to my room and ask if he could stay in there. Now, my friend is a former Marine. Nothing phases this man. One day, we were all chilling in the living room and we heard someone banging on the door yelling, "Where is Chester? Where is my son? I know he's here. I'll call the police." We answered the door and a very worn down and old looking woman with wild eyes was screaming that phrase over and over until our other friends started yelling at her until she left. We then named it Chester. Chester would begin to move things, flicker the lights, and shake the room at the most inconvenient and terrifying times. Like the shower, the final straw for me was the clawing at my door. At night, it would scrape and scrape and scrape until I would scream and run towards the door, and nothing would be there until the last time where it towered over me like a behemoth. If I hear a cat scratching at a door, I immediately get sent into a panic attack. And that's why I don't have one, lol. I would leave the apartments, but the torments for my friend wouldn't end. He had moved back in with his parents, and I was with my grandparents. We lived fairly close. He texted me and asked me to come over. I found him on his porch, wild-eyed and holding his gun, but I heard the strangest wails, all popping from different places in the neighborhood. He motioned me to come inside. I asked him what was that, and he looked at me and said, "So you can hear it too?" I was like, yeah, that's not something you just don't hear. It's really loud. And he said, "Then why aren't the neighbors reacting?" I went quiet. He then said, "He won't let me sleep, bro. He's always there, always screaming right as I fall asleep. Please stay here and watch over me till I fall asleep." I of course obliged. I had to listen to the wails till sunrise. It would then, in 2020, target my brother after he challenged Chester, mocked him and dismissed him. For months, my brother was barely getting sleep. And when he did, it was only night terrors, paranoid and too scared to be in his apartment at night. Then this year of 2021, it targeted my grandmother. I had moved out and she didn't understand what was going on with this thing towering over her. She called for me, but obviously I wasn't there. She's fine, and it hasn't bothered her since. I've gathered more information on Chester from my friend. As it turns out, more happened in the apartment than I know. Apparently, he had a full-blown conversation that lasted like 3 hours with Chester, which involved multiple hallucinations, including showing him a giant pile of money that he could pick up, touch, and feel, only to disappear in his hands, tormenting him with visions and laughter. There's a lot to go over. I guess I will go over how the events unfolded to me. It started a kind of strange. As a kid of at least 6 or 7 years old, my parents were looking for the broom in the house as it had gone missing. They were tearing the house apart trying to find this broom and eventually gave up. Weeks later, my mum was vacuuming in our computer room where we had a large shelf in the corner in a way that would not allow for things to pass around the sides. This shelf is also about 200 pounds. Behind the shelf was the missing broom. I, of course, was blamed, and it was a big ordeal. This was only the beginning of the strange occurrences. Soon after that, several things followed. Everything from knocks to brand new light bulbs going out. Some things worth mentioning are the TV remotes flying off the table. Not just falling, but flying at least 3 feet forward and then falling to the ground. At this time, other miscellaneous items were falling too. Plus a couple of my infant brother's toys would go off at random times during the night. Now, my dad grew up in a conservative Christian household, so he was very quick to dismiss the stuff he saw happening. But the more he experienced, the more he started to pay attention. One of the things I vividly remember is sitting in the living room and my play school plastic table eating some apples. I heard my name being called, clear as day in a whisper. I quickly ran to the back of the house where my mom was and told her what's happened. My mom is very religious, so we said a prayer. Soon after that incident, we moved houses out of central Texas due to my dad getting a new job. We didn't really think about those occurrences after that, until things started happening again. The first occurrence I can recall is the most chilling one. My dad got home late from work, and my brother was asleep in the living room. My dad was talking to my mom when he thought he heard someone talking in the living room. He walked in there and found my brother asleep talking to someone, like he was having a bad dream. My dad listened for a little bit and began to hear something else, a young girl's voice. He couldn't make out what she was saying, but my brother kept responding no to it. My dad quickly woke him up and asked him what he was dreaming about, and he replied with, "A girl. She was asking me to go with her." My brother slept in their bedroom that night. Several other small things happened later, such as things being moved or knocks, but a couple major things happened when I was about 11 or 12. My mother was up late one night while my dad was on a business trip. She slept with our two Dachshunds that were very calm. She was studying for her online college and she heard heavy footsteps coming down the hallway. She assumed it was me and my brother. My dog became alert and started growling at the door. Apparently, my mom had never heard a dog growl with such fear before. Her doorknob turned and the door opened, with no one on the other side. I remember being woken up to my mom crying, holding me and praying. One day, I witnessed my dog get hit by a car. As I was running back to the house to tell my mom what happened, she heard me screaming that Frida got hit by a car. As soon as she heard that, the brake to the house flipped and we had no power. I'll explain this occurrence at the end. One of the most recent things that happened in 2014, I was getting home from school. It was around dinner time and my mom was cooking a casserole. I was in the kitchen with her getting the table ready. I remember seeing her drop the casserole dish and it's hitting the ground and making no noise. I asked her, "Did you just drop the casserole?" She looked at me puzzled. She said, "Yeah, I dropped it about an hour ago. I had to remake it." The dish was on the stove and nothing was on the ground. I swear I saw that dish hit the ground. So this is what I experienced firsthand, but I wouldn't find out the whole picture until later in my life. My mom has always had issues with stress and anxiety. She started school in 2005 when all of this stuff happened. My dad saw this correlation and did some research. He found that this occurrence is called a poltergeist. He found that sometimes stress can affect people in a way that magnifies supernatural occurrences. I guess in a way, you could say Mum was some level of psychic ability. Even hearing this as a kid, I was skeptical. Ghosts are one thing, but psychics? I later found out that my mom's side of the family has experienced much worse than what I did. My grandpa grew up with 10 siblings in one small 2-story house. Most of them stayed in one room and would play there a lot. One day my grandpa was showing his dad a handstand while in his room. It was a bad place to do a handstand because there was a glass mirror right behind him. If he were to fall, he would land on the mirror. Sure enough, he fell, but the door to his room opened and stopped him from hitting the mirror. The scary part is that the door didn't open that way. The door opened through the threshold and stayed. My great-grandfather grabbed my grandpa and slammed the door back into place and yelled, "That damn door isn't supposed to open that way." There's a lot of things that occurred with that side of my family, but it would take a book to explain. To wrap it up, going back even further in my family lineage. My mom's great-great-great-grandmother was hung for being accused of witchcraft. My mother practiced witchcraft in her younger years, and me and my brother have had dreams predicting the future of numerous occasions as children along with my mom. One last thing. In 2017, I was with my wife at her mom's house. While watching TV, we saw a dark figure in the reflection. It started in my wife's mom's room and moved into the hallway. I told my mother-in-law, and she'd seen the figure in her dreams. She thinks it had something to do with the guy she was dating at the time, went to a psychic and told her about the situation. She told the psychic about what I saw, and without her knowing anything about me, said it ran in my family. I haven't experienced anything since 2017, and my mom is done with school and hasn't experienced anything for a long time.